keeps us with that beautiful vibration in our heart. Ba-rum-pa-bum-bum. So Merry Christmas. It's upon us. And I get to share some words, interestingly enough, as we try to speak about silence. Our monitors have a radio station. It's like, stop. It's like we want to get away from news, yet it's like, coming through. So, silence. What do you do with silence? And as I shared in the earlier service, silence has different energy, right? Sometimes silence is welcomed. Other times it can be more from a pessimistic aspect. Somebody giving you the cold shoulder. Someone just shutting you out of anger. There it is. Sometimes that. But then there's also the mystery of the sacred silence, that deep silence that we witness when we watch snowfall with no sound, when we witness those still, quiet hours in the morning when we awaken and we're about to do our spiritual practice, and it's quiet. And so we look at all of these forms, and I'm going to share some stories from different aspects and the different ideas of struggling with silence, trying to find silence, trying to be in silence, trying to be comfortable with silence. And in the first story comes from a Zen practitioner, and this is from the book This Is Getting Old by Susan Moon. And I think many times I found myself in this, so maybe you'll recognize a little bit of you in it. But this person in particular, Susan, was a Zen Buddhist practitioner for many years, and she assumed that her meditation practice would always be there to steady her. What could be more comforting than 40 minutes in a peaceful, familiar zendo with the sweet smell of straw matting? And she was going through a difficult period of her life, wondering where she was, kind of feeling the haunting depression looming over her. So she was going to turn to her spiritual practices. And she said, so she was looking forward to this retreat, but it didn't help. The demons in my mind took advantage of the silence. Has that ever happened to you? The demons of your mind take advantage, but they weren't real demons. But they didn't care whether they were real or not. They tormented me anyway. And her Buddhist teacher had encouraged her to keep on sitting. Just watch those painful thoughts. Just watch them as they arise and watch them pass away. That is so annoying when you're in the middle of it. But I've heard myself say that. Oh, just let them be like clouds that burst in front of the sun. But when you're not there, you're just not there. So she says, so I sat down on my zafu, and the painful thoughts arose, all right, but if they passed away, it was only to make room for even more. She thought, and one insult after another, and then she said, the worst one was, I am the worst Zen student that there ever was. When I told all of this to my teacher, I was disappointed that it didn't make me feel any better, that my spiritual practices were a bunch of bull. She said, the teacher said, you don't sit to get something. You sit in order to sit. Another one of those. If you want to make yourself feel better, it won't work. But she said, didn't Buddha invent Buddhism in the first place to alleviate suffering? Did all those other people in the Zendo really get out of bed at 5 a.m. for no particular reason? Still, I kept going back, hoping that if I meditated hard enough, I'd have a breakthrough. In the past, sitting in Zendo, I too had experience of watching my worries turn to dry powder and blow away. I signed up to sit for a week-long intensive meditation early that December, commemorating Buddha's enlightenment, because he too sat under that Buddha tree. So I've had many sessions, and so I drew myself into this one. And the first day, all I did was cry. I cried quietly, because I didn't want to disturb anyone. Second day was worse. The tears and the snot dripped off my chin. I hated myself. Nobody else will ever love me. Bring your attention back to your breathing, my teacher would advise me. This was like telling a person on the rack whose arms were being pulled out of their shoulder sockets to count their exhalations. And yet I wasn't on the rack. I was in a familiar zendo. All around me were my Dharma brothers and sisters, hands in their pretty mudras. As for my mudra, I dug the nails of my left hand deep into the palm of my right, feeling relief at the simple physical pain and momentary proof of my existence. And on the third day, during a break, I snuck away to the payphone, and I called my sister. Choking my words, I told her, I don't know who I am. I tried to convince her, and she tried to reassure me, but all she heard was a few words of trying to comfort. And the fourth day was even worse yet. There was a distance between me and the people on the other side, and it was infinite. Even though they were half-lotus knees, only 6 inches away from mine, I thought of the man who was going to be taking care of me after all. But I'm nobody. I'm nobody, I thought. There's nobody here at all. This feeling of no self was supposedly the point of meditation, and yet I had somehow gotten on the wrong path. While a nameless pressure mounted inside me, the people around me just kept sitting. I couldn't stay another second, and I left without getting any permission. Driving away, this is the worst day of my life. She said, there have been other days, but no, this was the worst day of my life. And she drove, and she screamed, and she pulled at her hair, and she laid down in the forest, and she rolled on the ground, and she went underneath and allowed the underbrush to scratch her and poke her. I liked getting stuck by the leaves. Then it made her feel real. I picked up the fallen branch from a redwood tree and began flailing myself on my back. That bodily pain was easier to bear than the mental pain pushing inside of me. See, trying to find the silence. And then I scared myself. How could I be spending my afternoon beating myself with sticks in the woods? Had it come to this? I picked up the leaves and out of my hair and went on home. And the next morning, the 5th day, I called the Zen setter and told him I wasn't well. And that was an understatement. And I didn't sit for many months after that. I thought I'd failed, decades of failing, decades of practice, I'd failed. Only later, after the depression subsided, could I see that there was a growth. Choosing not to sit was choosing not to be ruled by dogma, to be compassionate with myself, to take my spiritual practice into my own hands. And that's an awesome revelation. When we no longer sit and struggle to try to force our practice upon ourselves, but to allow the silence to just come, as Stephen Smith's beautiful poem, come from our very bone marrow. That is where the truth lies. And Thomas Merton, a great philosopher, spiritual philosopher, says, not all men are called to be hermits, but all men, all women need enough silence and solitude in their lives to enable that deep inner voice of their own true self to be heard, at least occasionally. When that inner voice is not heard, when one cannot attain that spiritual peace that comes from being perfectly at one with his true self, his life can become miserable and exhausting. For he cannot go on happily for long unless he's in contact with that spring of the spiritual life that is hidden in the depths of his own soul. If one is constantly exiled from his own deep home, locked out of his own spiritual solitude, he ceases to be a true person. He no longer lives as a true human. So I invite you to question yourself. Have you allowed the spiritual discipline of silence to hold you, to sustain you, to wander into silence, and to know that even in silence, thoughts will still appear? It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Thoughts are thoughts. It is their nature to draw to the surface. But there's a stillness and a silence even then. And another beautiful story, and you know this person, and I'll share who it is at the very end. There were times, of course, when it was possible and even necessary to keep away from a crowd. The prisoner craved to be alone with himself and his thoughts. He yearned for privacy and for solitude. After my transportation to a so-called rest camp, I had the rare fortune to find solitude for 5 minutes at a time. Behind the earthen hut where I was to work, and in which was crowded with 50 delirious patients, there was a quiet spot in the corner of a double fence of barbed wire surrounding the camp, a tent that had been improvised there with a few poles and branches of trees in order to shelter a half-dozen corpses, the daily death rate in this camp. There was also a shaft leading to the water pipes, and I squatted there on the wooden lid of this shaft whenever my services were not needed, I just sat and I looked at the green flowering slopes and the distant blue hills of the Bavarian landscape. Framed by the meshes of barbed wire, I dreamed. I dreamed longingly, and my thoughts wandered north and northeast in the direction of my home, but I could only see clouds. The corpses near me were crawling with lice, but that did not bother me. Only the steps of the passing guards would rouse me from my dreams. Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a powerful teacher to all of us. His wisdom, his heart, his courage, his way to find himself in such horrific conditions and have experienced so much loss, yet he was able to find solitude and silence. And that was his saving grace. So going into silence, where is it for you? Are you paying attention to the moments where silence is stirring inside of you? Are you being drawn and called to that divine mystery? And it requires patience of your heart and honesty. So the practice of going into the silence, into that secret room or closet, allows us to move from the voices in our head. It really will. We move from those voices. They're just thoughts. And it is true, just let them be. And go to that place in your consciousness where you feel that sense of stillness. I am. I am, I am, I am. And pretty soon, whatever the torturous thoughts are, falls away from the sentence. When you say, I am unworthy, the unworthiness falls away. And you find yourself in the practice of I am, I am. And there's this beautiful silence that embraces you, and there you rest in the divine. So there's this place in the consciousness where there is inaction and stillness, this place of the divine. It's inward, and it's always leading us to our center. It's the altar of our heart of consciousness, where we express the prayers of our heart in this divine sanctuary of your own being. This is where you speak your prayers. This where you might have tears of anguish, tears of sorrow, tears of despair. Right there is this holy silence waiting for you to lean into it, to be embraced, and then to allow the still small voice within you, that divine, sweet voice, to beckon you home, to beckon you to the heart. It's the place of reflection, contemplation. We connect here in that deep wisdom, that place where you develop the practice of listening for moments of silence instead of trying to just figure out the meaning of words or experiences. No distractions from conversations of the past. We wait. And it's a curious thing. It's a curious thing because I love to live in a silent world. And if the phone rings, it's like, do I want to answer that? Who is that? And there's this opportunity to either, thank goodness for answering machines, right? Or they can even tell you now who's on the phone. And you can recognize, well, do I want to come out of my silence? Or do I want to just allow this to be interrupted because this is important before me now. This is where the Buddha says this is the practice. This is a practice of compassion. You are doing your work all the time, but you're also called into action the moment you hear the phone ring for you. Meister Eckhart says nothing is so godlike as silence. And I find that a beautiful, revealing statement of release. There is a story of a Joseph Dispenza, and I don't think it's Dr. Dispenza, but it's another young man that was a monk. It might be him, I'm not sure. I didn't do any research on it. I just know his name and I want to respect his name. But he entered a monastery himself, and he took a year vow of silence. A year. I can't do it even for one meal. I just, when I go to retreat centers and they say it's a silent breakfast, all I want to do is laugh, and all I want to do is snicker at something or pretend that if I whisper out of the side of my mouth that's silence. Charlie's really bad at it. But, and I've been at places where they say, okay, you don't speak from the moment the session's over till you sleep through the night and not till you meet again in the morning. Oh, there's so much to say in those times, right? It's just like, I'm so wise, I've got so much, but I have to be quiet and I'm going to forget it. But so it's a challenge, and I think the challenge is when silence is forced upon you. When you don't say, I welcome it and I'm choosing right now to be silent, but when it's asked or dictated to you, there's a little bit of settling that we have to do with that, and that too is a practice. But in his silence, he describes his life in that year as a monk, and it wasn't so much that when you were spoken to, you had to just go, silent. You would speak back, but only with enough words to give the answer, and then you would go back into your deep self. No Twitter, no Facebook, no computer, no games, a whole year. No newspapers, no magazines. You could read Holy Scripture, but even that was chosen for you. So you think about a year of that mind control of silence. Where would you be? And I invite you to try to wrestle with that. Could you do that? And even see how long you can try to do it, even as a practice in the next few weeks. But he found the deepening of that and the power of the still small voice. And in the end, he encourages everyone to practice an hour of silence every day. Schedule this hour at a particular time every day. During that hour, turn off the phone and all of the sources of information. Put down all your books, put down everything, light a candle. That is your witness. You watch that flame. That flame is a draw to the silence. Look at it. It's natural. And sit quietly and simply rest. Now, doesn't that sound wonderful? Sitting and resting for an hour of deep silence, staring at a candle, letting everything else go, listening to the silence, all the time enjoying this hour respite from thinking, reviewing, planning, and imagining, just being in the present moment, breathing deeply and mindfully, bringing in the silence and expelling mental noise. At the end of your hour of silence, let your first word be an expression of gratitude or love, and then blow out the candle and go about your business. We can do that. And what a great way to find your way into your new year, into your Christmas, into your holidays. So Yogananda speaks of my silence. Like an ever-expanding sphere spreads everywhere, my silence spreads like a radio song above, beneath, left and right, within and without. My silence spreads like wildflower of bliss. The dark thickets of sorrow and tall oaks of pride are all burning up. My silence, like the ether, passes through everything, carrying the song of the earth, the atoms, the stars, into the halls of the infinite one. Think about this calling into silence, this delivery of self. And it is shown often where you come before a master teacher. There's a story of the Maharishi, and this woman had everything she could possibly want. She had this lovely family and possessions and wealth, and then one day it was all gone. There was an accident, her family was gone, her belongings disappeared. She had nothing, and she couldn't stop weeping. And she goes before the Maharishi, and she lays her head down, and she's just weeping and going to him for some solace. And he says nothing. Said nothing. And she ended her tears, and she finishes by saying, she grew very impatient. She asked him, "Don't you have anything to tell me to relieve this? Don't you have any solution, an explanation? Can't you give me any real teaching so I can go on? I am desperate. I am desperate." He said nothing, absolutely nothing. And then she began to sob again, because she thought that even the Maharishi, even this great saint, was abandoning her. Then she grew tired from sobbing and noticed that the Maharishi was looking at her. And very quietly and simply, she raised her eyes and she looked back at the Maharishi. What happened then, she said, cannot be put into words, because what happened then was transmission. And that's the gift of the holy silence. That is what Yogananda speaks to, of spreading that silence into the ethers. And we allow that to be the healing balm of grace that washes through us. We allow ourselves to recognize that even though we stand in situations that we feel are disempowering us and shaking us to our very core, within that is the divine grace. Within that is the silent refuge. Rumi says, "Listen, clam up your mouth and be silent like an oyster shell, for the tongue of yours is the enemy of the soul, my friend. When the lips are silent, the heart has 100 tongues." And Ernest Holmes says, and you can listen to the stillness, and you can listen to that stillness until it speaks to you. In silence, everything you need is within you. So how do you paint your silence? What does it look like to you? I'm going to invite Judy up to play a little music, but I invite you to close your eyes and paint the picture in your mind. Where is the holy ground of your silence? Where do you venture to on these holy days? Think about all the songs. It came upon a midnight clear. And this is a story of each one of us standing in the midnight clear, asking us to step and tread lightly into our consciousness of truth. So we close our eyes. My silence. We're beginning to touch that mystery of deep silence, this place of absolute reflection and contemplation, this place where we connect to the deep, deep knowing, the deep, deep wisdom within, the deep, deep place of bliss. We're called inward. This is the language of the divine. I invite you right now, relax into your being. Relax. You are loved. So you relax. I am love. I am loved. So I can relax. And I listen. In between the notes, I listen. And the still small voice rises from the depth of my soul. It's quickened. Did it disappear? I breathe again. Between each heartbeat, between each phrase spoken, there is a pause. In that gap, in that space of nothingness is the divine. All the potentiality, all of the truth is revealed right there, right in between. Amongst it all, within it all, is the truth. I breathe deeper. Within me, a silence merges with my bones. And I am held in sacred arms. The divine is holding me in the silence. And out of the silence, the true self is revealed. My way is revealed. My way is revealed. So we join together. We're right at the altar of our heart. This is where we penetrate our prayer. This is where our holy ground, the secret closet. We're all in our own space. Like snow falling. It's so quiet. It's so precious. Keep relaxing and leaning in. This is grace. This is love. We take another breath and we go deeper. This is where we're healed. This is where we find our way. This is where the divine light is revealed. The flame of the divine is revealed, shaping us our way. And we breathe even deeper, and we relax even more. I am that I am. The divine beckons me even closer. It is the mystery. It is the silence. It is the call of the Holy One within me as me. And as I release these words, just words, we allow for just a few moments to sit in our own silence. Just for a moment. Be still and know. And so it is. Be very, very